Hello and welcome to the top custom Hearthstone cards of the week. I'm feeling sick, so I may sound a bit weird, but I have some cards to show you. First up is Calras Mask, 1 mana 0/3 legendary hunter weapon that, when you have equipped, changes your hero power so it can only target minions and has overkill gain 2 armor. So instead of your 2 mana going to the enemy face, you would target a minion, and if you're able to overkill it, you'll also gain 2 armor. And what's interesting about this card is it doesn't necessarily change your hero power, but it's more of a buff. So you could actually use this in a Baku deck to instead deal 3 damage to enemy minions. It would be much more powerful to clear and much more likely you could get an overkill. Personally, I don't have much faith in a control hunter anymore. It just seems like the baseline value in hunter is geared towards an aggressive deck. So the fact that Calras Mask kind of goes against the smorking vibe and is more about board control, it would be tough to convince me that this would make a control hunter. With that said, it is a legendary weapon, which means you only get one of these in your deck. So in order to try to build your deck around this sort of game plan, you need to be lucky and draw this weapon. Maybe if it wasn't a legendary, it would be a little bit easier, or if there was some sort of other card that would allow Hunter to draw a weapon, maybe you could make this an exclusive Baku card, where you have to have only odd cards in your deck, but you get the weapon at the start of the game. It would be an interesting change to the Hunter hero power, and I'd love to try it out in the game. Next up is Rotting Corpse, 3 mana 0/3 neutral minion with the death rattle, summon 4 1/1 maggots with rush. I mean, you guys know, if I see an egg, I have to include it in the episode. Rotting Corpse has the same cost as Devil's Soar Egg, but instead of a 5/5, it looks a little bit more like Scarab in that you summon 1/1 minions. But the 1/1s have rush. In addition to that, the maggots are also beasts, so if you have any sort of beast buffing cards out on the board like Leok, then you could actually deal even more damage to enemy minions. Really, this death rattle would benefit from any sort of minion board buffing cards. I think Rotting Corpse would be a much better version of the Scarab Egg, and it would be interesting to see how many different decks would try to take advantage of it. Probably still not as good as Devil's Soar Egg, but still a nice egg. Next up is Traumatized Veteran, 5 mana 4/8 paladin minion with the battle cry, for each friendly minion that died this game, deal 1 damage to this minion, and if it doesn't survive, cast Avenging Wrath. 5 mana for a 4/8 is a pretty good stat line. But with the battle cry, for all the minions that had died before you played this, it's gonna reduce this minion's health. I think the turning point for this card when it starts to become bad is when 3 friendly minions die, and this ends up becoming a 5 mana 4/5. Definitely not worth the stat line. Still, if this minion ends up being dealt quite a bit of damage, Paladin does have some heal, so they could use that on this minion, maybe synergize with some of their other healing cards, and get it back up to that 4/8 stat line. On the other hand, if 8 or more friendly characters have died this game, you actually get to play Avenging Wrath for only 5 mana. So maybe on curve you get this out as a 5 mana 4/6, which is pretty decent, but if you choose to hold onto this card, it could just act like another Avenging Wrath. It's a very unique concept where the entire card's use is going to be different from the beginning of the game to the end of the game. I will say, it would be extremely hard to play this on curve without having at least 3 friendly minions die. If you don't play minion turns 1 through 4, especially with your paladin hero power, you're probably going to lose the game. And so I think because this is at 5 mana, there's not really going to be a lot of games where you're going to want to play this card without it taking a considerable amount of damage, prompting you to try to heal it right away. And for that reason, I feel like it would mostly be used for its Avenging Wrath ability. Odd Paladin would easily be able to turn this into Avenging Wrath. And so it makes this card more of that spell as opposed to a flexible minion that will do both. It's hard to tell exactly how this card would play out. It would be super interesting if a card like this were to be playtested to see how powerful the effect was and how the stats should be distributed. Let me know what you think down below. Next up is March of Time, 1 mana warlock spell that draws a fatigue card and deals its damage to all minions. So you could play this at any point in the game, but let's say on turn 1 you play this, you would draw 1 fatigue card and deal 1 damage to all minions. Then in that same game, when you got through your entire deck and you started drawing fatigue cards, you would instead be dealt 2 damage. So whenever playing this card, there's the immediate negative effect of taking some damage in order to have a cheap board clear, and then there's the long-term effect where the next time you draw a fatigue card, it's going to be even more damage. And so just running 2 of these cards could give you some pretty decent early game removals. But you could also use this in the late game. You could end up ramping the removal as high as you want, as long as you don't kill yourself. Probably the most notable application of this would be in a Mechathune deck, where you're just focused on clearing the enemy board, trying to survive, and getting rid of all of your cards. It's an interesting idea, and to me it seems really balanced, because if you're not planning to go through your entire deck, then it's just some cheap board clears with a minor setback. But if your game ends up going to fatigue, this card could come into effect as a powerful board clear, or something that ends up getting you closer to death. Really interesting idea, and I'd love to see it in Warlock. Next up, we have Poultry, which is a chicken and a tree pun, which is pretty great. 2 mana, 2/2 druid minion with the battle cry, choose a minion, and the death rattle, transform it into a 2/2 treant. So just to clarify, the battle cry selects a minion, and then when Poultry dies, that minion selected becomes the treant. It's kind of like a combination between Voodoo Doll and Polymorph. It could be a decent hard removal, but you need some sort of 2-card combo, or you have to wait a turn until you can attack Poultry into a minion. But it's not exact removal, in fact it's transformation, which in some cases can be better. But regardless, you're gonna still have to deal with the 2/2 treant. You could use this on one of your own friendly minions and try to make a druid treant deck, but I think if this were to ever really see play, it would be used on enemy minions. While mage can use their hero power with Voodoo Doll for a 5 mana removal, druid doesn't really have a great way of activating Poultry on that same turn. So I don't think the card would be as good as Voodoo Doll or see as much play. If the meta ever became much more controlling and druid needed more removal, then I think Poultry could be an option and something to definitely change up the game. Regardless if this actually saw play or not, we definitely need this card art in the game. Next up is Rule, Protector of the Innocent. 8 mana, 4/6, legendary paladin minion with the battle cry, resummon all minions that died without ever attacking this game. So for all of those minions that you play out on the board and then your opponent just destroys them right away, this would allow you to resummon them. It doesn't just resummon all of your minions that didn't attack, but it also resummons the minions that didn't attack for your opponent. Any aggro deck is going to play minions and attack with them the next turn, guaranteed. But if you're playing a control deck, you may end up playing taunts in the early game that never have the opportunity to attack, and this would allow you to resummon probably an entire board of them. And if we're talking a really controlling deck, you could even use this to resummon more powerful cards like Malygos. 4 damage isn't a lot in the long haul, so maybe being able to resummon it could benefit you down the road. I think most of the time you're going to be willing to attack with a minion and not resummon it with this card. Not being able to attack is just such a disadvantage. And so I think Rule would end up being a super controlling paladin card that would be used in a really slow meta in order for paladin to try to keep up with other control decks. Ultimately, I don't think paladin really has that control deck nailed down yet, so this would be a tough fit, but I like the idea nonetheless. And last up we have Polymorph Wonder. 5 mana mage spell that reads, transform a minion into a Scroll of Wonder and shuffle it into its owner's deck. So this combines Polymorph with Scroll of Wonder, and instead of transforming a minion into a 1/1 sheep, it instead goes into your opponent's deck, and when they draw it, it's going to cast a random spell. I love this card. It's combining the memes of Scroll of Wonders and a legitimate form of removal. But I think at 5 mana, it's just too expensive. I think if you made this 4 mana, it wouldn't even be a power creep on Polymorph. A 1/1 isn't really that big of a deal when you're destroying a powerful minion. And when your opponent draws that Scroll of Wonder, it could do more damage than that 1/1 sheep. But also, it could help you out even more. Even at 4 mana, who knows if this card would actually see play. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of Psychic Scream, but you could make this card, let's say, a 7 mana spell that transformed all the minions into scrolls and then shuffled them into each of their deck. That way, if you have minions on your board, you get some scrolls, and your opponent would also get some scrolls for their minions. It would be a super controlling and powerful board clear, but it would add a lot of randomness to the game. I don't know if that would be a great idea, but it's an idea. Well, those are all the cards for this week. If you missed last week's, it's here on the screen, and I just put out another misunderstood card video on the Marsh Queen. Once again, apologies if I sounded a bit weird or flubbed up some words, but hopefully by next episode, I'll be all good. Also, one last announcement, thank you for the 40k subscribers. I appreciate it a lot, and if you haven't subbed yet, try it out. It's a fun time. Alright, that's all for now, and until next time, ta-ta.